We should probably do some sort of introduction. Like, hi, everybody. I'm Patricia.
I'm Lee.
And we're weird as fuck.
Yeah, I suppose you probably should, I guess, huh?
Yeah. Because someday we might be famous. Okay. So. You and I have very different visions of what this podcast was meant to be.
Yep.
I'm not in it just to make masses of people weirdly happy.
That's stuff I like to hear.
You're
a lot
weird.
of people like me like to hear that shit.
Well, it's strange, true, and, sort of salaciously entertaining, but I don't want to spend my life researching people's weird
just
fetishes.
do one here and one there, like you do with the glitches in the
How
Matrix.
about you do some research?
I'll find some raunchy shit.
Well, when you're dealing with paraphilias, it's all raunchy shit. So, at your request and your constant insistence,
Yes, I am a whiny little bitch.
I spent some time researching some of the most bizarre paraphilias that I could find. So, paraphilias differ a little bit from fetishes. Fetishes are those little weird kinks that we all have. Everybody's got something that's considered outside of the mainstream that sort of gets your motor running. All of us do.
And then there's some that are really weird.
And then there are paraphilias, which are more along the lines of abnormal sexual desires. And we're not talking about furries. When you dig deep into it, what a furry is and what gets people in that community going really does have a basis in just life. Sort of an escapist.
Yeah, people that don't want to see who they are or whatever, and they want to be somebody else.
That's exactly it, I think. Wanting to be something or someone else, someone other than they are. And there's no harm in it. This is a community that's just out there living their lives and they're having a good time and nobody gets hurt. That's a fetish. A paraphilia is abnormal and often somebody does get hurt. And that's sort of the point of it. And that's what I've researched here because I wanted to keep it just as weird as possible.
Weird as fuck.
Well, in this case. So these often take sufferers into really dark territory and force them to choose between physical and emotional pain and sexual gratification.
Yeah, there's a lot of people in the pain that just do some weird shit.
Well, there's pain and then there's pain. And that's what we're covering here. So I've rounded up a list of some of the weirdest ones that I could find and some of the ones that if you out there experience any of these or are drawn to any of these, please, we encourage you to get help because this is dark territory that we're traveling in now. And a couple of these might be a little bit difficult for me to pronounce. I tried really hard, but some of them are just...
There's so many fucking long ass
names. So the first and most obvious one is autoassassinophilia. And I'm really shocked that I got that one out on the first try. That is essentially sexual arousal by the idea of being murdered, preferably through torture.
I thought it was going to be the suffocation one by the name, but I was
That's
wrong.
autoerotic asphyxiation.
Yeah.
And that's also really, really dangerous. Don't do it.
Yeah, there's quite a few people have died doing that shit.
Exactly. David Carradine.
And what a way to show yourself dead.
Yeah. Oh my God. So this is characterized by people like I said, fantasizing about being murdered and who derive sexual satisfaction from the idea of somebody killing them through usually pretty gruesome means. There are actually online communities that are dedicated to this fantasy. But for most people, it's just a fantasy. And not everyone who has this paraphilia are actually suicidal, which surprised me. I would have thought that anybody who wants to die, I mean, to me, that just automatically suggests suicidal ideation.
Turns you on to die while you're having sex or something. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
That's a one-shot deal.
Yeah. Really? Yeah. So there is one really famous case that I found. A woman named Sharon Lopatka. She was a 34-year-old wife and business owner who belonged to one of these online communities. And she often talked about her desire to be brutally tortured and murdered and how much that aroused her. So she would get on these online communities and she would talk to people, and she had several men who agreed to meet with her for the purposes of torturing and killing her. But when they realized that she was actually serious about it, they backed out. For them, it never crossed the line between fantasy and reality.
He just thought he would be torturing her, basically.
Well, maybe not even that, just talking about it.
Well, there's a lot of them that are into that shit.
Well, there's a lot of them that are into that sort of shit too. But these guys backed off at the whole idea of actually, killing her. That was until she met Robert Frederick Glass, a computer analyst and apparent fan of child pornography.
Of course.
He's a great guy, who entertained the same violent sexual fantasies as her own. He had been married, but when his wife found emails and chat room receipts, essentially, showing his penchant for these violent sexual fantasies, she kicked his ass out. Sharon's husband was completely unaware that any of this was going on. And so when he found a note from her saying that she was suicidal and not to come looking for her and not to prosecute the person who killed her, her husband freaked out and got the police involved immediately. Unfortunately, it wasn't soon enough. So Frederick met with Sharon at his home in North Carolina, and according to Glass, they engaged in rough, though consensual, sexual play for several days before he ultimately strangled her and buried her in the backyard. The police found their information, their communications, on her computer, and it didn't take them more than a day or two to track them to his house. So he's a criminal mastermind, obviously.
Oh, yeah. He's real smart.
And they watched him for a few days, but they saw no sign of her, and panicking thought, maybe we're too late. And unfortunately, they were. But in their search for her and for information on him, they found more than 900 pages of emails between the two, dictating exactly what he was going to do to her. And they were so violent and so far out in left field that the police never released the documentation. He was ultimately sentenced to only 36 to 53 months for her murder because she basically consented to it.
Yeah. Makes it a little more difficult that way.
But he died of a heart attack in prison, so all is well. I'm surprised that the other inmates didn't get him for the child pornography.
Maybe they did.
Maybe. So this is one that you've probably heard about, and it's one of the more dangerous ones. Erotophonophilia. I got it. Erotophonophilia. This is sexual gratification that comes from taking the life of another person. So think of sexual sadists. They're also known as lust murderers. And the list of these people was long. I'm going to post it on our website, but just the more famous ones was 2 pages long. So this one is essentially killers receiving sexual gratification from watching another person die. They often also suffer from necrophilia. So they revisit the scene of the crime and continue to engage in intercourse with the corpse until they can no longer do so.
Till it's rotted away.
Well, I was being nice about it, but yeah. Until it's just too far gone. And sometimes even after the fact. So Jeffrey Dahmer would keep the skulls of his victims and have sex with them after the flesh was gone.
That's a rough ride.
It's all horrific. And I hope that he hurt his dick. That's all. So this one is pretty self-explanatory. You get off watching people suffer and die. And some of the more famous people who have been diagnosed as having this paraphilia are Rodney Alcala, Ted Bundy, Andre Chicolito, Dean Corley. The list, I mean, John Wayne Gacy, Albert Fish. It's a long and horrific list, and I'll post it on the website. These people aren't always necrophiliacs, and necrophiliacs don't always make their own corpses, but it's not uncommon for the two to go hand in hand.
Fun times.
No, it's not, and I hate you for making me go through all this. So this one, and I couldn't find any specific cases to share with you on this one. Well, I'll get into that in a second. Mechanophilia.
Where they fuck cars and shit.
And vacuum cleaners, yes. So this one isn't necessarily harmful or terminal. It's just weird. And
see a vacuum cleaner maybe working, right?
there, and I'll post this on the website too. There was a lady in Scotland recently, like real recently, like last March, who woke up and looked out her window because she could hear her car alarm going off, and some guy was having sex with her Beamer. Can you imagine? I mean, she took pictures of him. There's pictures of his bare ass on the media, full in the street, in full view of everyone. I'm only assuming that alcohol was involved, but he's going for it.
Don't see what you can fuck on a car. I mean,
exhaust pipe.
But that's not gonna feel good, and you'd have to have a cocaine dick to get anything out of it.
I don't know.
Even then, it would be a rough ride.
Yeah, this guy was going for her bumper. I don't understand.
I know they rub up against the car, and that gets them off, and it's weird.
Yeah. Maybe my standards are too high. I don't know. But there have been cases of people with, vehicles, obviously. The guy in Scotland it wasn't Scotland. It was Switzerland.
So people that fuck trees and all kinds of shit.
That would hurt. You'd get splinters. I'm sorry. No. And that's actually a different paraphilia. Having sex with nature. Of course,
there's 300,000 of them.
There's so many. Vacuum cleaners and men are some of them.
Of course.
And that one I can see because you can get the little tubes that taper. But I have read stories about they've been anonymized, obviously, because it's just too humiliating to put your name out there, I suppose. But of men who've ended up in the hospital because the vacuum cleaners suck hard. So.
Yeah, that's what they're going for until they go, oh.
Till they realize just what that means. Yeah. So, mechanophilia. A little lighthearted before we get into the next one. Sexual arousal at the thought of being eaten. Vorophilia. And some psychologists believe that it has to do with being consumed, going back into the place of creation. I don't get it.
No.
And we're not talking about being, eaten in the fun way. We're talking about actually being consumed. So for most people, this is just a fantasy. Like most of these, even if you have these sort of inclinations to these paraphilias, it never goes beyond that whole fantasy stage. But in 2001, in Germany, it did. So Armin Muse, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, went online and advertised for a willing victim. And he had several people who actually contacted him with interest. But when they realized that he was serious, again, backed out. Because it's one thing to sort of banter about it with someone who shares your fantasies. It's quite another to actually allow someone to devour you. But he actually did find someone. And I didn't write down the man's name because in this case, he was the victim and obviously probably mentally ill. But he was contacted by a young man, an engineer, and they got together and he filmed the whole damn thing. And this guy was consenting. He took some sleeping pills and some alcohol, and they first severed his penis and cooked it and tried to eat it, but it was overcooked and too chewy and they could not. And then Muse put him in a warm bath and just let him bleed out. and then spent the next 10 months consuming him. And there are several hours of video that the police had to watch in order to make their case. Yeah. That's, I can't even, I don't want to eat a person anyway. It has no appeal to me. I don't want anybody to eat me. I certainly don't want to watch them eating me.
Yeah, surprised all he did was chop off one thing while he was alive. If that's his fantasy, you'd think they would keep chopping stuff off of him and him watching him eat it.
Well, the other guy's fantasy, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was because he was in too much pain. He had lost too much blood. Police said by watching the video, it was pretty clear that the guy was pretty weak by the time they got around to the eating portion. So maybe he was just too far gone. And so Muse, I think, according to my research, that it took about 40 minutes for him to bleed out in the tub. So, and then, yeah, the Rottenberg cannibal was caught, convicted, and sentenced to prison.
Fun times.
And now it's illegal to eat people in Germany. So
it wasn't before?
I don't think it was. Well, I think that's one of those things that you feel like we really don't need to make a law because people know this. Oh, no, wait. Yeah, we do. It's like in Washington State where it wasn't illegal to have sex with farm animals because people should know better. And then that guy in... It was northern Washington.
It was a horse that
it was in Enumclaw, wasn't it?
Death. It was something like that.
Yeah,
some little dinky.
He had
town.
sex with a horse and it ripped up his colon and his.
Yeah, he tore him a new asshole.
And now the Washington State legislature had to say, "Well, fuck! Now we have to make this a law because people are apparently too stupid."
Apparently, it was a very popular barn that the guy was renting his animals out to. Making a lot of money. Till that guy got killed.
I'm sorry, animals can't consent.
Well, if the horse is fucking him to death, obviously he's having a good time, or he wouldn't be doing it.
Well, it's instinct. It's abuse. It's animal abuse. People do the same thing with like chickens and stuff.
Well, they usually kill them.
It will kill them.
Yeah.
It's not funny. Well, it's horribly funny, but it's terrible. On to the next one. Teratophilia. This is aroused by the physical injury or deformity of yourself or another person.
Yeah, I've heard of that shit.
In its worst forms, it leads to people actually deliberately causing injury to themselves or somebody else. In the most common cases, it deals with furries. I mean, if you go online and you go, wait, this took me to some really deep places that I didn't want to be. I want you to know that. But there's a whole bunch of films in the adult genre that deal with monsters. You can buy sex toys that are shaped like tentacles and all sorts of interesting things because people have these fantasies about sex with monsters. There's a movie that was out a couple of years ago, The Shape of Water, where it's like a creature from the Black Lagoon type of guy. And he falls in love with this woman and they have sex in the water. And I haven't watched it. I probably won't watch it. But yeah, there's all sorts of, I mean, there's erotic literature, there are movies, and there are sex toys so that you can live out this fantasy without actually having to harm another human being to get it done. But there's a whole industry dedicated to teratophilia. But yeah, if you're into it, there's a lot of weird shit out there that surprised even me, and I've seen a lot of weird shit. So you can buy monster dildos on Etsy.
Custom made for your pleasure.
Yes, actually. Because the things on Etsy have to be
custom made, yes.
They're all handmade. Your own special
handmade monster dildo.
I don't even want to think about it. Bigfoot toy. Anyway, moving on now. Hematolangia. Lagnia? hematolagnia. I knew I was going to screw up one of these. That one, as the name implies, is the arousal by the consumption or sight of blood. So think vampires.
Yeah, there's lots of people that fantasize about being vampires and they actually bite people while they're having sex.
Yeah. And, it's one thing to kind of play that way. It can get pretty dark, though, for obvious reasons. For most people who play at being vampires, it's about the mystery and the mystique. And, immortality has its certain appeal, I suppose. I don't want to live forever, but, for some people, the idea of being a 1,000-year-old powerful being who can control minds, that's fun. Bleeding somebody out so that you can get off, not so much. So this fetish, something once done in the shadows, is now actually pretty widely received in BDSM circles. And blood play is actually quite a lot more common than you'd think, which really surprised me. So in its purest form, between two consenting adults, there are communities, I found them obviously in New Orleans, Florida, and Texas, that are dedicated to living this lifestyle. And they take some really, really thorough precautions. They every member of their little family groups are tested regularly to make sure that they don't have any bloodborne illnesses. They're very careful and very choosy about who is allowed to participate. And they when they're doing the bloodletting, they use sterilized instruments. It's not people biting each other because that's how you get infections. It was really interesting to read about.
I actually watched them show on HBO, and I had
HBO used to
they
have,
actually did that.
Yeah,
They
HBO used to have a
surgical
series
shit.
called Real Sex, which sounds really salacious, and of course it is because HBO, but it was also really interesting. And yeah, they talked about, I don't remember where they were from though.
No, they all had the vampire fetish,
Yeah.
but they would use like needles and shit.
They would use needles. They would use sterilized
everything.
scalpels and things like that. They were really, really cautious. And that, I think that's perfectly fine. You're consenting adults, do you? But for some people, for example, Richard Chase, who in 1977 to 78 murdered, dismembered, and consumed the blood of 6 people ranging in ages from 22 months to 36 years. He was called the Vampire of Sacramento, and he did it just because it aroused him to do so. He liked watching them bleed out. He liked playing in the blood. He liked consuming it. He died in prison.
Good.
Yeah. He murdered a baby.
Yeah, that's fucked up.
Okay, so this one is apodomnophilia. That's totally wrong, but that's what I got. I spelled it correctly. I've just pronounced it wrong. This is arousal from amputation, also known as body integrity dysphoria. And this one is actually considered a psychological condition. So it's, if you can imagine someone who has something like foreign limb disorder, where they look at a part of their body and their mind tells them that it's not supposed to be there. And so for some people, it's just a matter of my body isn't what it should be, and parts of it have to be removed in order for me to be made right.
I thought you were talking about the people that get off on people having stumps and shit.
And that is another form of this. So there are people who look at their own bodies and can only achieve some sort of sexual satisfaction by removing the offending limb. Then they feel whole and complete and beautiful, and it gets them off. And there are other people who are aroused, and there's actually a different name for that, but there are people who are aroused by the idea of other people's disfigurements.
Yep.
And that goes along more with the whole monster thing. Anyone who, to our modern eye, appears monstrous and strange. And in this case, I mean, there have been cases of people who've removed offending body parts, but one of the most famous ones was Amber Shuping of North Carolina, who she had really poor vision even as a child, and was convinced that she should have been born blind. And she went into her adult life absolutely obsessed with the idea of being blind. As a child, she would lay in the grass and stare at the sun, hoping to burn out her retinas. It didn't work. It damaged her eyesight, but she was still sighted. When she was, I think, about 30, she poured drain cleaner in her eyes, destroying her eyes and her eyelids.
That would fucking hurt like hell.
Yes, she said it really, really hurt. And now she's blind.
And now she's happy.
Yes and no, because now people in the blind community think that she's a fucking psycho because she poured drain cleaner in her eyes and she gets no sympathy for being blind. Typically, when we look at somebody who's blind, we want to assist them in any way that we can because they have a disadvantage. When people look at her, they're like, you're nuts. You did it to yourself. Fuck you. Go away. That's pretty much the life she's living now. But yeah. So in her case, it was a what the hell moment. But for most people, it's something that requires some sort of psychological intervention. Obviously, she didn't get any good assistance. And so she ended up harming herself for no reason. I told you these were fucked up, man. And our last one that I threw in just for shits and giggles is climacophilia. Sexual arousal at the thought of being thrown down the stairs.
Oh, baby, thump, 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 thump.
Well, I picked that one because of how often I myself have fallen down the stairs. And it's so funny because I've actually had people who asked me who were concerned for my safety because they thought maybe you were abusing me. And I'm like, no. Yeah, Friday at work, I actually fell up the stairs. And I don't know what's going on with my feet, but I've like kicked things like 4 or 5 times in the last 2 days because I didn't get my feet high enough. Or I stepped too close to something in my bare feet and my toes hit like an inch before they were supposed to. Something is desperately wrong. But yeah, I was walking up the stairs with some stuff and tripped and went face down onto the stairs. And
yeah, I thought you were going to do stuff that was like really funny and weird.
No, I just picked some fucked up stuff because you kept bugging me. So I'm like, okay, you're going on this ride with me. So yeah, when it comes to, I mean, I can pick out some really weird stuff, but really when it comes to what brings you pleasure, weird is in the eye of the beholder.
Yep, everybody's in all kinds of shit.
And I'm not out to kink shame people. What happens between consenting adults is entirely up to them. And as long as nobody gets hurt, I say go for it. Life is too short to worry about what the neighbors think.
I've never given a fuck about what other people think. So for my family, that's about it.
Well, and even
everybody else can fuck off.
And even then, but and I'm not into kink shaming people, but I figured if we were going to talk about weird fetishes, we were going to talk about some things that were universally considered bad because people do get hurt. Whether you're hurting yourself or somebody else, it's just not okay.
But there's lots of fetishes that are fun and people have a good time.
Yeah, well, I don't necessarily want to laugh at people and make them feel bad, though. I don't know. Unless your fetish is clowns, then fuck you. You should feel bad.
Because she hates clowns.
I fucking hate clowns.
Very, very, very much does she hate clowns.
Yeah. Remember when I was at my girlfriend's birthday party for her little girl and the clown kept getting in my face? Everybody loves clowns. Smile. And my girlfriend walked up to her and said, no, she's going to punch you. You need to go now. So yeah, there you go. Fetishes. Will you leave me alone now?
Probably not. See, lots of people have to write in and say, do more.
Please don't.
Do more.
All right. If we get some requests, I might do some funny ones. Not clowns. Just fuck clowns.
Yeah, there's some funny shit out there.
There's some really funny shit out there. But for now, there you go. Weird fetishes. Brought to you by me. Don't try any of those at home. Until next week.
Like us. Follow us.
Bye.
Bye.
Want to stay connected between shows? You can find us on Instagram at WeirdAsFCKPodcast, on Twitter at WeirdAsFuckPod1, on Facebook at WeirdAsFCKPodcast. Send us an email at weirdasfckkpodcast@gmail.com, or come on over to our website at www.weirdasfck.com. There you can check out our blog, pick up some merch, look over our sources, and even share your weird experiences. You might even make it on a future episode. We would love to hear from you. Until then, tune in and keep it weird.